Thank you for that very generous introduction, and it's great to be with you all this afternoon. I suspect all of you know the Eros statue in Piccadilly Circus. What I suspect you don't know is that it's the public memorial to the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury, who was one of the great Victorian philanthropists. And he is somebody, rather bizarrely, who features prominently in my life. One of the many things that the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury did was he was president of the Ragged School Union. So looking after some of the most disadvantaged people living in London in the third quarter of the 19th century. And history records that on Valentine's Day 1866, he had a lunch for 200 Ragged School children where they were served beef, plum pudding and ale. And at the end of the dinner, he gets up and he said, "If I gave you the chance to change your lives and go to sea, how many of you would take up that opportunity?" And the historian records that all 200 hands went up. And so began one of the most extraordinary charities in this country, the Shaftesbury Homes and what became known as the training ship Arethusa. And I tell you that story because at the age of 12, I found myself living on board the training ship Arethusa, an old four-masted sailing ship moored permanently on the River Medway opposite Chatham Dockyards, and that was my home and school for 2 years. I come from a dysfunctional family. I was taken away from my family at the age of 12, and my life was destined to be on the ship till I was 16, and then to join the Royal Navy or the Merchant Navy. Rather worryingly, 50 years ago, overnight, the ship closed, and the captain said to me, "Derham, have you heard of public school?" And I said, "No." He said, "Tomorrow you'll go into one." And a fairy godmother who lived in New York paid for me to go to boarding school, or posh school, as my shipmates said. And so I was sent to Pangbourne College, and my life was transformed by education. And as you heard, I was lucky enough to go to Cambridge and be headmaster of 3 really interesting and different schools, including this one. The second most important person in my life was my headmaster, Peter Points, because he took a chance on me. I was bedraggled, ill-spoken, poorly educated, and he gave me a chance. And on my last day at school, we had breakfast together, and we reminisced about the journey I had been on. And he said, "Patrick," he said, "the last bit of advice I want to give you are 6 words, and they're the words of Martin Luther King. What are you doing for others?" And those 6 words have been my motivation throughout my life. And I was so thrilled when President Obama tweeted those words on Martin Luther King Day in 2019. So whatever I've done in my life, I've tried to give back, to make a difference to people. And I've worked with UK charities, so Inter-University, which has centres now in 40 of the most deprived areas of this country, trying to raise aspiration, because university remains the way to break the cycle of poverty and deprivation. With Eastside Young Leaders Academy, which works with black boys and girls on the edge of gang culture in the East End of London. At rugby, I set up the Arnold Foundation for Rugby School, which was for people like myself who were being deprived opportunity because of family circumstance. And that has become a national charity, the Royal National Children's Springboard Foundation, where several thousand pupils, like myself from my sort of background, have had their lives turned around. But I want to focus very briefly on 2 things that I'm doing since I finished at Westminster. And I'm just very proud and humbled to be a small part of their journey. The first one is Crucible. And Crucible is a project inspired by a remarkable modern-day 7th Earl of Shaftesbury, a philanthropist, who had this idea that he wanted to make a difference. And he chose what he felt was the part of the world that needed the greatest help, sub-Saharan Africa. And he has this idea to create 100 schools across sub-Saharan Africa to create the next generation of African leaders. And the first school opens tomorrow in Lusaka in Zambia. STEM only, so every pupil will do maths, further maths, physics, economics, A-level only. We've written our own liberal arts curriculum, which I was helped with by a former deputy head from this school. And we're doing project-based learning, and we're going to teach them leadership as we go along. The idea is they'll go to the top global universities, they then come back to Zambia to make a difference. And the philosophy is, and this is a very clinical economist who's the philanthropist, the way to change GDP is to change secondary education and to create leaders. And so I go to Zambia in about a week's time for 2 weeks. Again, rather worryingly, I've got to teach for a week, but we're going for the official opening. But I want to tell you a story. I was there for the assessments just before Christmas, and just one girl, Mika, she lived right in the most northern part of Zambia. She had never, ever, ever left the compound that she lived on. Her parents had died of AIDS. Her grandfather she never knew, brought up by an illiterate, innumerate grandmother. The school she was at, the head recommended she apply to Crucible Lusaka. It took her 3 days, 4 buses, to travel 1,080 kilometers. She had never seen a white face before. She went through this grueling day of assessment with people that she'd never come across before. And on the last bit, she was interviewed by the founding principal and myself. And it's not often I'm reduced to tears. But when I said to her, why should we give you a place at Crucible Lusaka, fully funded for all the pupils, she suddenly swung round, eyeballed me, and she said, remember she's 15 years old, she said, the greatest resource in my country and in the continent of Africa is human capital, and we are destroying it. I cannot bear any more of my girlfriends dying from teenage pregnancy. I have got to make a difference. So to meet somebody like that is awe-inspiring and humbling. And we have the first cohort of 29 pupils like that. And so the ambition is that we will now create schools across that part of Africa. So it's a very exciting thing to be part of. And the second project is called the Al-Sama Project. And this is based in the Shatila refugee camp in Beirut. This started in 2020 with 2 extraordinary women who worked for McKinsey, who decided they wanted to make a difference. And it started with female empowerment. But they then started to think about basically trying to treat these young people, giving the opportunity for education. But refugee children have no chance of ever breaking that cycle. Only 7% of refugee children across the world have the chance to go to university. It's ridiculous, and these people are as bright and as sparky as all of you here today. So I got involved because the barrier they have got is they're outside of formal education. So they have no way of proving any certificates or exams. So I've helped them fundraise, and with the idea of creating an exam that we're working with Cambridge Assessment, the world's largest exam board, to create an exam which we're calling G12++, that they will take at 18. There'll be 5 elements. It'll be maths, it's going to be science, it's going to be English, it's going to be Arabic, and it's going to be life skills. And we're going to beta test it in 2026 when the first cohort go through. And then it'll become an exam for all refugee children across the world. So to be a small part of something that is really potentially transformational is awe-inspiring. So we're now working with universities to get them to recognize the exam. So Cambridge have done so, Leicester, many universities across the US. And I'm working with some extraordinary people who are busy beyond comprehension, but want to be involved in this project. And again, on my last call, these poor children who've been displaced from Syria have been displaced again because of the situation in the Middle East. But what's exciting, not only are we creating this exam, but we are going to package up the model, the Al-Sama model, and take it to other parts of the Middle East. And hot off the press and amazing news, Al-Sama are about to open a center in Damascus. So this is a really game-changing thing. So I tell you those stories and my background, my motivation. And for me, for all of you, I would just encourage you to do the same. All of you here, all of us in here, have benefited from a liberal and liberating education. And with that comes a responsibility to give back. I have always argued and said it many times on this stage that without the capacity to serve others, a formal education is worthless. So I want to leave you and for you to take away what my headmaster said to me, those 6 words of Martin Luther King. Go forth from here and just always think, what are you doing for others? What can you do to make a difference? And don't ever worry if it's a small thing. Never underestimate the impact that that has and the ripple effect of doing something like that. So there we are. That is all I want to say to you. So I will leave you with those 6 words. What are you doing for others? Never forget it.